All right, welcome to our first basically review session, and we're gonna post it. So um, at the moment, turnout is a bit lower than we would have liked. So I'm gonna see if we maybe will change the time in future. We're gonna talk to the professor. Um, Also, if you guys like, yeah, we might have a poll in class, and just make sure you show up next time to take advantage. But yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna start with chapter 12 a little. So how this is gonna work? We're gonna do chapter 12. We're gonna do a little summary. So this is not gonna be a class. This is gonna be it's not a substitute. It's gonna be a basically a complement. It's gonna help you understand that a little bit of the concepts. And then we're gonna answer 3 or 4 questions in the style we did. And the same we're gonna do with chapter 13 and see if we have time. And if you have questions while you're live in the section, you can obviously ask them, and if not, then that's it. So I hope you guys like it.
Yeah, so I'll just go in a little as well as to what we're going to cover today. So Alex, has put most of the presentation together, so I'm going to, refer to him on most of the homework questions. However, I'm going to go over chapter 12, which is basically talking about economic growth. He is going to go over the financial institutions, which is chapter 13. And then together he'll kind of explain, some of the homework questions that I think Dr. Manal Blankson wanted us to cover. And I'll be behind him. And like I said, like I'm always as well here to answer any sort of theoretical questions or questions that you guys have. But we'll get right into it then. Chapter 12, when we're talking about economic growth, we're basically just one of the biggest questions in economics that, I mean, if you go back to even Adam Smith, who most people consider the kind of founder of economics or economic theory as we know it today, in his book, The Wealth of Nations, kind of talks about this idea of why are some countries richer than others? What factors when it comes to productivity of other countries. And so Alex and I actually were taking an advanced macroeconomic theory class. And although, the models get a lot more complex, we try to, account for these same things of what has caused this increase in output and just even like a little historical anecdote to it as well. If you look before the Industrial Revolution, uh, the wealth of most countries around the world was relatively very similar. You didn't see huge differences in, I guess you can say, standard of living and economic growth in countries. It wasn't until after the Industrial Revolution that you started to see, countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, the Western offshoots. So that would be like the United States, Canada, maybe even Australia, obtain these high levels of productivity in such a short amount of time. And then when you compare that with some of these other countries, like maybe in, uh, you know, South America, certain parts of Asia, and even Africa and other parts of Europe, you didn't see these same levels of economic growth. And now there is a model that kind of explains economic growth in a whole. It's called in industrialized countries, it's called the Solo model. Now we're not going to get too much into that. Basically, what you just are going to need to know is
Yeah,
that
don't get too off topic.
yeah, the main factor of how we calculate production is GDP, and we talked about that a little bit in the other chapters. How do we calculate GDP? What is GDP? It's the final sale of all goods and services. Um, and basically, to find our output per worker, or this is what we're trying to find is our productivity. Um, that'll be we'll calculate that by taking the GDP and dividing it by the total quantity of labor. So you can think about it
The
almost
labor force.
as GDP per capita, and that's basically calculated by taking the GDP of the country, dividing it by labor force or population, for that matter.
So I made a
Um,
little example here. I don't know if you guys watch Game of Thrones. So let's say King's Landing has a population of 300,000. Let's say they have 200,000 population. Therefore, L equals 200,000. Very easy. And then the GDP was a million. So Y equals a million. Just wanted to show you guys. So what is productivity? An easy example. Y over L equals 5. Just showing.
Yeah, so in essence, what you could basically kind of understand that as is realistically the GDP per capita in this country is 5, or like some 5 monetary units of whatever currency. Now, what you will see too as well is when that L, just from algebra or arithmetic and calculus as well, as that L increases on the bottom, and the output on top, the productivity or the production stays the same, you're going to get lower and lower levels. So I don't know if that's something you guys are going to talk about at all in your discussion sections, but basically population, or like the labor, how many people are in the labor force, definitely plays a role into uh, GDP per capita and productivity per person. So productivity is a key determinant. It's not the only one, but it is a key determinant of living standards. Um, so yeah, so that's roughly the first part on productivity and GDP. If you could just scroll down a little, Alex.
Yeah, no, I want to, I'm actually doing it on purpose without scrolling down at first. So I just want you guys to think like it being live in class, or if you're like watching the video, pause. So how do we increase productivity? Just like I could show you guys the answer, or you can think, how do we increase Y over L? How do we get more output per worker? It's very intuitive. So better technology. If one worker operates one big machine and one worker will produce way more the machine. So that's acquiring physical capital. He needs some education, some knowledge to operate that human capital. And the third one, what else? Technology. You need technology to have that human capital and that physical capital and natural resources. You can't really improve that or not, but if you have a bunch of natural resources, but like now Justin can continue. But just think about it logically. How do you increase the output per worker? Like if you see the model, it might be very difficult, but when you think about it just intuitively, it's very easy.
Yeah, so when we're talking about how do we increase productivity per worker, I think Alex made a couple good points, but basically, if you're looking at it mathematically, that Y is like, the change in that Y from year to year is going to be need to be bigger than that L, or that per worker, if you want to increase productivity per worker. So how can you do this? Basically through better technology, and that can be acquired by either better physical capital, as Alex mentioned, a machine that will uh, pump out resources or products quicker, normally denoted by K, um, or human capital, knowledge. Now, one thing to also keep in mind with human capital on a macro level is human capital doesn't depreciate. Um, we continue to increase knowledge, say in certain fields in certain areas, and that knowledge continues to be uh, grown upon and grown upon. So a human capital is another way to increase productivity, and also better natural resources. So um, this is the first time you guys are probably going to be familiar with what a production function is. And normally like the main one that's kind of used in most macroeconomics models is a Cobb-Douglas production function. But basically, all you need to know is that output, or how much you produce, is a function of your labor and of your capital. And also, in other models, when it gets more complicated, we also include human capital and natural resources. And so when we divide everything by L, like each input by L, we'll get an effective capital to labor ratio, a resources to labor ratio, and human capital to labor ratio, which will allow us to get this productivity per worker as well. So,
Made a
and
point. Why
yes,
don't why
yeah,
don't
I mean, go ahead, Alex.
are you
No, so
like
if we're talking about, go ahead, go ahead. You just go ahead.
so why don't you divide A by L, which is basically technology? Um, so also when you think about it logically, um, like we have this technology, we have Zoom, right? It doesn't improve if we have less people in our country. Let's say Switzerland, they use this video conference technology. You don't need to divide by the people for technology to go advance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I would also say from like a mathematical perspective too. Right now, and like I said, in these in like principles, uh, we're giving that we call this A in macroeconomics the TPF, or technological productivity factor. So it's basically just some constant, and we normally like assume that technology, that A right there, grows at some sort of constant rate, unless we're talking about a different type of theory. So there are theories that do account for technology being uh, like endogenous or assumed within the model, but I won't get into that too much. But yeah, as Alex said, that's why we don't divide technology. And you can also just think of that as a just a constant, you know. So all these are all of the determinants of productivity that I just mentioned: technology, physical capital, human capital, and natural resources. Um, and yeah, if you can just scoot down just a little bit more. Um, so one of the inputs that boost productivity is capital. What you often see, especially in the literature, is that capital is more productive than adding on more labor. Um, so, like for instance, increasing capital to labor ratio. A country increases capital by increasing savings and investing more in capital. So when people, think about it, like if you have some sort of income, you can decide to either consume it or to save it. And when you save that income, or basically investing it, you're giving that money to firms to invest in more capital. And so in the firms in the next period, they'll pay you back that capital with interest that they were able to use to increase their productivity. And when we're looking at the savings rates, savings rate is basically savings divided by disposable incomes, or like as we see right here, savings or savings plus consumption. And yeah, what else was I going to say about the savings rate? When a country, delays consumption in like in an original period, they're allowed to. It helps them consume more, by like often, like I said, the literature tends to say having higher savings rates tends to increase output and productivity
Uh,
in the future.
Also about the savings rate, we will do a example problem very soon, showing
Um,
you how to calculate that.
yeah, so yeah, if you can go into the next slides, Alex. So this is a really big concept that I'm gonna talk about here for a minute. It's called the diminishing marginal returns of capital. So basically, the way that you can think about it is, uh, say that workers are working at a plant and they have just one machine. So say whether it be one computer, whether it be whatever it might be,
I
you
use
know that
tractors.
that first unit of capital is very productive, because it helps increase their productivity by a lot. But what you start to see is the more and more of capital that you start adding on, it has this sort of diminishing marginal rate. And we talked about this a little bit. The law of diminishing returns applies a lot in economics. Like, that first, popcorn is a big one they use. The first bite of popcorn that you have, um, it gives you a whole lot of satisfaction, or utility is the economics term for that. But after a while, the more and more and more you start eating, that next, consumption of popcorn doesn't taste as good as the last one tasted. So you can think about the same with capital. Is the more you add on of capital, well, it may increase productivity. It's only going to increase productivity by just a little bit and a little bit and a little bit of amount. So like that first, um, you know, unit of capital is very productive. Then when you add on the second one, it's productive, but maybe not as productive as the first one. And like I said, if any of you guys have ever taken calculus, you'll see it kind of looks almost like a square root function. And what you'll see is that when keep changing in x, the y starts to not change as much. So that's basically the idea. And since it is a little blurry on my screen right now, Alex, I'm gonna let you go over that example with the tractors really quickly.
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's like he said. This the same thing. If you guys can see the graphic, the I made an example. Let's say you're in the country, Winterfell, and you only produce corn. So having like, let's say back in the days when they didn't have that physical capital of like a tractor, it probably took like you needed animals, you needed human labor. Like it was very hard being a farmer. Then once the tractor was invented, like let's say all of a sudden this medieval country without technology has one tractor, wow, their productivity would skyrocket. It would skyrocket. And then per worker, exactly, like one worker could produce way more. If they had two tractors, they also, and three, however, there are only so many fields they can actually like plant on, use it. So that means if they had 50, it would probably just stand in the way. So the output increases. So if you guys have a multiple choice question, it increases, but only by a little. It will never decrease, but it's just going to get smaller and smaller. It's going to get close to zero, like in calculus, but it's never going to be zero. It's still always going to increase by a tiny fraction output.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, this is the last slide actually for this chapter. Yep. Um, how to grow other determinants like human capital and technology. I didn't really go too much into it because it's more memorization. Um, Education, human capital, want people to be educated, smart, health, nutrition, want people to be healthy. Political stability is a big factor of political growth. Um, no corruption, um, free trade and research for technology. Those are all things that help. Um, yeah, if Justin wants to say something, but also it kind of shows you how natural resources help, but a lot of countries that have tons of natural resources aren't rich. And people are like, why is that? That's because natural resources is only one ingredient, one determinant of growth. So that means if you're in a country that has corruption, no free trade, political instability, and you have these amazing natural resources, that doesn't equal economic growth, and that's what we're seeing in the world right now.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add to that. I think all of that was very good.
Yep. So let's go to quick some questions. I hope you guys can see them. Can you see it?
Yes, can see it.
Okay. So let's say last year, a country had 800 workers, worked an average 8 hours and produced 2,800 units. This year, the same country had 1,000 workers who worked an average of 8 hours and produced 14,000 units. Country productivity was. So basically, what they're asking you to do is just calculate the productivity in both years and then see if any of these statements are true. So let's say year. No, they did have weird wording, so let's say last year. So it's y over L in both cases, and y equals 12,800 and L equals 800. So that's gonna be the easiest thing you'll ever divide this, and this is 16. Same for this year, where y equals 14,000 and L equals. By the way, the hours don't play a role if you haven't noticed, so you don't need to include those. So it's 14. Now you have the answer 16 and 14. So last year was more productive. Capital stock last year than this year. A possible source of this change in productivity and change size of capital stock. So this could be right. So let's keep this one higher than last year. So the capital stock. Yes, this could also be, no, this couldn't be right. This could maybe be right because it's lower. But when you look, a possible source of this change. So now basically we calculated and we see that it could be A or C. But then we have to look at the other question. So it's a two-part question. So possible source of this change in productivity is a change in size of the capital stock, or C, lower this year than last year. A possible source of this change in productivity is a change in the size of the capital stock. So, oh no, it was obviously lower last year. I just solved it. Yeah, 14 is lower than 16, so it's only C. And yeah, D is not correct because obviously the capital stock does affect productivity. Number 8, country A has twice as many workers as country B. Country A also has twice as much physical capital, twice as much human capital, and access to twice as many natural resources as country B, assuming, and this is important, constant returns to scale. Which of the following is true in country A? You can look at the lecture notes about constant returns to scale. That just means in a production function of, like, let's say x, y equals x, let's say x squared and y squared in math. If you increase it by, let's say 2, then this holds true. This equals constant returns to scale, which basically means if you change the input by some amount, the output changes too by the same amount. So in this case, it's changing it by 2. So you don't even need to look at the answers. Neither productivity nor output per worker is going to be the answer. Because nothing increases. 3 imaginary countries in air saving amounts to 4,000, consumption to 12,000. In Bosnia, saving 5,300. So this this question asks you to calculate the savings rate. So all you have to do is you need to remember this formula where saving rate equals saving by disposable income. and disposable income equals saving divided by saving plus consumption. So you do that with, let's say air had saving of 4,000 and consumption of 12,000. So that equals 4/16, which is roughly, yeah, well, 4/16 is 1/4, which is 0.25. Bovnia, same story, just read the text and plug in 3/27, 3,000 plus 27,000. Okay, I'm gonna keep it this way. This is roughly 1/9, which equates to 0.11. Also, if you're dealing with fractions and you're like me and it doesn't always make intuitive sense, like from the start, just convert them to decimals. If you're like comparing numbers, especially in Qatar. $10,000 divided by, it's going to be 10,000 plus 50,000, so 60,000. It's going to be 1/6, which equates to 0.16. So do you see how converting showed me? So this is going to be the highest, A is going to be second highest, and be third in the ranking. So then you just read and see which relates higher in air than in Qatar. Is that a true statement? Yes, and it is higher in Qatar than in Bosnia. So read this statement. This is also correct, so number A. Now, back to diminishing returns. Then which of the following is true? If a country increases its capital by 1 unit, output will rise by more than it did when in the previous unit was added. That is wrong, because remember, it's always decreasing. Output will rise, but less than it did in the previous unit was added. This is true. Output will fall, and output will fall is completely wrong. It's going to be number B. And then all else equal, which of the following tend to cause real GDP per person to rise? It's also no math question. Just remember, change policies, yes. Strengthening property rights, yes. Increase in investment in human capital. Those are all things that will affect the determinants, which will affect the productivity. So D is correct. Are there any questions with this chapter? Well, if there aren't, then I'm gonna move on to chapter 13 a little bit, really fast. I'm seeing we're good in time, but we need to hurry up a little. Chapter 13 summary. So here we have, firstly, we're talking about markets and intermediaries. So here I made this little pyramid. So you have stocks and the stocks and bond market, which are a financial market. The difference, they can directly provide funds to borrowing, while the financial intermediaries do indirectly provide funds to borrowers. And those are in forms of banks and mutual funds. So I wrote a very brief what these are. I don't think we need to get too deep into it being an econ class, but let's just look. Bonds is basically you're lending money to someone, and you pay and receive interest. So you can buy a government bond, and you're lending them your money. So if the United States, for example, wants money, they can say, hey, buy our bonds, or the treasury or whatever. Then you give them, let's say, $10,000, and you get an interest, pay and receive interest. So that's the motivation. It's a safe investment, and they have maturity, which means it's only for the time being. You can buy a bond for the rest of your life. So I added that because in return stocks you can sell and hold forever. And so that means you can sell the bond while you have it before the maturity, or you can wait and just receive that interest and then get your original, like, let's say $10,000 back plus that interest you earned every year until it matures. And that's a way how governments, how companies make money from like individuals like us. Then we have stocks to invest in, partial ownership of a firm. So different than bonds. You basically partly own the firm. Receive dividends. I said sometimes. I'm in the stock market, so you can add that two ways of making money through stocks is a dividends, where you get some of the earnings, a little share. But the other way is basically just buying the stock and seeing if the value increases and then selling once you made a profit. Most of the time, buy and it does the exact opposite and you sell and then it goes up. Don't ask me, it's like magic. You can sell or keep forever. I also added because it doesn't have a maturity of like in the bonds market. So then the intermediaries are banks. I think everyone from us knows how bank works. Takes deposits from savers and makes loans to borrowers. So if you want a loan, you can apply. And if you just put your money in the bank, you also get interest. So if you keep the money, you're a saver. That's going to be important for later this section. You're going to be a saver if you keep the money, and if you want to invest, then you're a borrower. And then the last thing is a mutual fund. Sell shares to public and buy portfolio of stocks and bonds. Those are pretty also safe investments where you basically pay money for a mutual fund that invests in these two things. But it's still in the intermediary because it's not a direct, you get indirectly money. That's all good, but how does that relate to GDP? That's always a good question in this class. Like I always with topics you don't understand, it's like, why are we doing this? It affects GDP, and in particular, it affects the investment section of GDP. So assume a closed economy. So recall GDP is this equation. And let's say we're in a closed economy to make things easy. So that means nx equals 0 because a closed economy just means no trade. I think of North Korea, for example. I think that's an example of a closed economy. I think the only. But y equals c plus I plus g. So this is the GDP equation. And then if we rearrange, if we basically say minus g and minus c, then we can put those on the other side. So then we have investment alone. So investment consists of output minus government spending minus consumption. And this is also called national savings. Hence, I equals S equals C plus I plus G. I hope this makes sense, that this is an equal statement, because we said S equals I equals national savings equals C plus I plus G. Now, if you want to get the private savings, we basically, what we do, and this will sound weird, is we add t minus t on both sides. So this is equal to 0, and this is equal to 0. So we didn't ruin the equation. However, if we write y t minus c, this has a name. It's called private savings. Just like for now, know it. Just know it like y minus t minus c. And then t minus g is public savings. Or also, this is important when you look at budget deficits, it's basically taxes minus government spending. And if taxes are higher than government spending, we have a surplus. If not, we have a deficit. So this is public saving. And instead of I could have also written I. Remember that S is equal to investment too. So if, like I said here, if G is budget deficit, and if G equals T immediate, it's a balanced budget. So yeah, I hope this makes intuitive sense, and maybe this looks weird at first, but just like know the equation and the algebra is actually quite simple. Then the last big thing is going to be the supply and demand of a loanable funds market. So if you did good on supply and demand chapter, you should be fine. So basically, instead of demand, we're just doing the supply and demand of loanable funds. What's a loanable fund? Basically, a loan, giving out a loanable fund. So in red, I said supply equals saver. So when you're in the loanable funds market, think about when you have a question, think about this. The suppliers will always act as savers. So if you're a saver, you will want to have high interest rates. If you don't have any, if you could leave your money at the bank and they paid you 50% interest, no one would invest. But like they would save. So a lot more people would be saving. And the same with borrowers. If there's like high interest, no one wants to borrow because then they have to pay back so much interest. So here I wrote that down a little. So one of the things is that tax incentives for saving equals supply. I kind of emphasize that, and also the thing later that saving equals supply. The supply curve will shift right. A tax incentive will make people save more. And then the investment tax credit increases demand for loanable funds. Those are just two things you kind of need to like remember. Then again here, budget deficit G equal bigger than T. This means the government spends more than it makes. I didn't really go into government debt. That means like the debt we accumulated over the span, like the government at the moment. I think it's going to be with the Corona stimulus check up to 21 trillion. And the last thing is a budget surplus, which we haven't ran in a very long time. I wrote a really long paper on actually the budget, and yeah, it's amazing how much money we actually make, but how much we spend. So a budget deficit will cause less saving. Remember that supply refers to savings. So if we have a deficit, we will have to borrow money, because the government can't just say, oh, we need some money, let's print some. They actually have to borrow it from individuals or other countries. So that causes also crowding out, because they're basically taking the loanable funds from people, and then the interest rate will rise and the amount of loanable funds will decrease. If you can see that here, it's the initial equilibrium. So the interest rates rose in the loanable funds. So basically what it's telling you is budget deficits aren't good, even though we need them sometimes, especially during Corona times. Here, maybe after the final questions, after the questions, it will be more clear. So let's say, given Monica's income exceeds her expenditure, Monica is best described as a saver or a supplier fund, saver or demander funds, borrower, supplier funds, borrower, demander funds. First of all, because her income exceeds her expenditures, that means she didn't have to borrow any money, so she's definitely a saver. So this one, and remember, saver, supplier of funds. Okay. Also think about it too. If you leave your money at the bank and never take it out, you're always going to be a supplier, because you're the person that saves and gives the bank the money. Now 12, that's more a numerical example. So this is really important, because probably you'll have one of those questions on the exam, so really pay attention. Suppose in a closed economy, GDP is equal to 20,000. So let's underline this, y equals 20,000. Also, NX equals 0 because it's a closed economy. Consumption is equal to 15. See. Government purchases equal to 4,000. And taxes equal to 3,000. What are private, public, and national savings? So let's derive the formula because personally I couldn't memorize it. So let's say y equals c plus I plus g. And remember, saving is equal to investment. So we want to isolate investment. So y minus c minus g equals investment. And then the last part is adding the taxes on both sides plus minus t. So they cancel out on this left side. On the right side, it will be y minus c minus t. This is going to be your private plus t minus g, which will be your public. And now you just have to plug in. So let's say let's calculate private savings. Y equals 20,000 minus 15,000 minus 3,000 equals 1,000. Oh wait, 2,000. And public 3,000 minus 2,000. Oh no, 4,000 government purchases. Sorry, equals minus 1,000. So as you can see, it's negative, and that's true because this is the budget, and basically they're running a budget deficit because they had to spend more than they made in tax revenue. And then the national savings is basically private plus public. The order doesn't matter, so it's going to be 2,000 minus 1,000, 1,000. So basically, now when you look at the answers, this one is the one that's closest, so it's going to be C. Now this answer should be easy. A budget deficit changes the supply of loanable funds, changes the demand of loanable funds, changes both supply and demand of loanable funds, or does not influence. So this is a non-analytical question. You kind of have to remember that a budget deficit, because the government has to borrow money, the supply of loanable funds will actually decrease. So it's going to be A changes, because it reduces net savings. The reason it reduces net savings is which reduces public savings. Policy that induces people to save more shifts. So now again, think, draw here this loanable funds market. Here you have funds, and you have the interest rate, and just right here maybe S, and here D. And well, in this question, it says the supply always, so think of supply equals saving. So that means you can only think about the saving market, and let's say it induces people to save more. So saving will obviously shift to the right. So what does that mean? Will it increase or decrease investment. First of all, this is left board, no, and no. But because the interest rate will decrease, people will invest more because people don't want to save as much, and the answer is going to be A. So yeah, this was, unless Justin has something to add, this was kind of our first review session. We hope it kind of helps you, and yeah, you guys have any questions?
I think I'm good. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, in that case, we'll stop recording and make sure you tune in next time, especially if you have trouble with some of the concepts. Then we can make like just devote some time to your individual needs or one hard question on the review. But I took these questions directly from the review, so if you understand those, they're very exam related.